Volunteers play an important role in end-of-life care. If volunteers want to serve effectively in their roles, both the organization and service users need to pay attention to maintaining appropriate volunteer boundaries. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, boundary means a real or imagined line that marks the edge or limit of something. Volunteer boundaries are guidelines that define the scope of a volunteer's role and function. They specify the required ethics, behaviors, and attitudes for volunteers when interacting with service users, staffs, and other volunteers. This helps volunteers understand what they should and should not do when providing services. Some may wonder, it's just volunteer work. Why are there so many restrictions? In fact, volunteer boundaries are an essential part of ensuring the service's quality. It helps service users have more expectations of volunteers and help volunteers clearly understand their scope of responsibilities, which directly and indirectly gives them more confidence to act in accordance with their role when facing different service users. At the same time, when service users make requests that are outside the scope of a volunteer's duties, volunteers will know how to reject, making the service more stable and of higher quality. These boundaries also remind volunteers that they are not friends with the service users, which prevents volunteers from becoming overly emotionally involved and service users from becoming overly dependent on them. Now, let's hear from Professor Vivian Lou, the project director of the Jockey Club End-of-Life Community Care Project, as she will further explain the volunteer boundaries for us. There are 3 key areas of volunteer boundaries that end-of-life care volunteers should pay attention to. First, respecting the personal privacy of service users. It means confidentiality. Volunteers must respect service users' rights regarding privacy and personal data protection. Second, respecting service users' rights to being informed and their autonomy. Third, paying attention to relationship boundaries, which ensure no personal interests or support and friendships beyond the scope of service commitments are brought into the volunteer relationship. Regarding personal privacy, volunteers must not discuss a service user's situation with anyone outside the service team or in public area. They must not disclose a patient's condition or prognosis without their family's knowledge. They also must not provide their personal contact information to service users. Regarding the right being informed and autonomy, volunteers must not impose their personal political values on service users and their families. They also must not make unilateral judgments or speak on behalf of the service users. Regarding relational boundaries, volunteers must not misuse their volunteer identity to solicit money or other material rewards from service users. They must not engage in any physical or sexual behavior with service user. Additionally, without the knowledge of the organizations, volunteers must not provide any support or advice to service users that falls outside the scope of the organization's services. During the actual volunteer service, boundaries may sometimes become blurred. As a volunteer, what should they do in such situations? Volunteers can first consider whether the issues conflicts with personal privacy, the right to be informed, and their autonomy, or relationship boundaries. Then, they can apply the following 5 principles to help handle boundary-related issues. 1. The principle of non-maleficence. 2. The principle of beneficence, altruism. 3. The principle of respect for autonomy. 4. Avoiding conflict of interest. 5. Team-based approach. In the next session, we will explain in detail how to apply these 5 principles. Does this sound very complicated? What is the right thing to do? Actually, by referring to the organization's volunteer guidelines of conduct, volunteers should be able to handle the vast majority of situations. If there is still uncertainty, volunteers must consult with the organization's staff. By doing so, they can provide high-quality and meaningful volunteer services to terminally ill patients and their families.